February 26, 1959. Ural Mountains, Soviet Union. The search party moved slowly through waist-deep snow. Their breath hung in the frozen air like ghosts. It had been 3 weeks since anyone had heard from the Dyatlov group, 9 young hikers who'd set out to conquer the northern Urals in the dead of winter. The rescuers had been walking for hours, squinting through the blinding white landscape, when one of them stopped. He pointed ahead, his voice barely audible over the wind. There! On the slope of a mountain the locals called Kolatsyakl, Dead Mountain in the indigenous Mansai language, stood a tent. It was half collapsed, partially buried under snow. The rescuers approached cautiously. Something felt wrong. As they got closer, they realized the tent hadn't been damaged by wind or animals. It had been slashed open from the inside. Long, deliberate cuts, as if the people inside had been desperate to escape. One of the rescuers crouched down and peered through the torn canvas. Sleeping bags, boots, jackets, everything was still inside. Whoever had been here had fled into the night wearing almost nothing. The search party leader felt his stomach tighten. He looked down the slope, following a trail of footprints leading into the forest below, barefoot prints, in minus 30 degrees Celsius snow. He turned to his team and said what everyone was already thinking. They ran for their lives. But from what? Welcome to Classified Hidden Histories. I'm your host, and in this series, we investigate the events governments tried to bury, the mysteries intelligence agencies won't explain, and the truths hidden behind official narratives. Today, we're opening one of the most baffling cold cases in history. This is the Dyatlov Pass incident. Part 1. The Expedition. January 23, 1959. Sverdlovsk, Soviet Union. 10 young adventurers gathered at a train station, their backpacks stuffed with food, cameras, and climbing gear. They were students and recent graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, smart, experienced hikers embarking on a Category 3 winter trek, the highest difficulty level in Soviet mountaineering. Their leader was Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student with a reputation for meticulous planning. He'd mapped every mile of the route. The group's goal was simple: reach Otorten, a mountain in the northern Urals, and return by February 12th. Among the group were Zenaida Kolmogorova, a confident 22-year-old economics student, Rustem Slobodin, a witty engineer, and Lyudmila Dubinina, an adventurous economics major. They were joined by Alexander Kolevatov, a physics graduate, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko, both engineering students, Semyon Zolotaryov, a 38-year-old World War II veteran with mysterious scars, and Nikolai Thibault Brignol, a construction engineer. One member, Yuri Yudin, would turn back early due to illness. He would be the only survivor, not because he escaped, but because he never made it to the mountain. The group took a train to Ivdel, then a truck to Vizhai, the last inhabited settlement. From there, they would ski into the wilderness. On January 27th, they began their ascent. For days, everything went smoothly. Dyatlov kept a detailed diary, recording weather conditions, distances traveled, and campsite locations. On January 31st, they cached some supplies to lighten their packs for the final push. That evening, they set up camp on the slope of Kolatsyakl. It was a strange decision. Experienced hikers don't camp on exposed slopes in winter. The wind is brutal. The cold is worse. But for some reason, Dyatlov chose this spot. That night, they wrote in their journals, ate dinner, and sang songs. One of them even started a satirical evening newsletter joking about the expedition. The last entry was dated February 1st, 1959. By morning, they were all dead or dying. Part 2. The search February 12, 1959. When the Dyatlov group didn't return as scheduled, their families weren't immediately concerned. Delays were common on winter expeditions, but by February 20th, when there was still no word, the alarm was raised. A search party was assembled. Volunteers, students, and military personnel combed the mountains. On February 26th, they found the tent. Inside, everything was in order. Food was laid out. Boots were lined up. Cameras and journals were intact. But the tent had been cut open from the inside, and the hikers were gone. Footprints led downhill toward a forest about a mile away. Some of the prints were from bare feet. Others were from socks or a single boot. The footprints showed no signs of panic at first. They were evenly spaced, almost orderly. But they led directly away from the tent, into the freezing wilderness. The first two bodies were found near the tree line, under a massive cedar tree. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko were dressed only in underwear. Their hands were burned as if they'd tried desperately to start a fire. Branches on the cedar tree had been broken off, as if someone had climbed it in a frenzy. 3 more bodies were discovered between the cedar and the tent, spaced about 300 meters apart. Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin had been trying to return to camp. They'd frozen to death before they made it. But where were the other 4? It would take 2 more months to find them. Part 3. The ravine, May 4th, 1959. Search teams discovered the last 4 bodies buried under 4 meters of snow in a ravine. They'd made it farther than the others, perhaps seeking shelter, but what they found there defied explanation. Lyudmila Dubinina was missing her tongue, eyes, and part of her facial tissue. Semyon Zolotaryov was missing his eyes. Thibaut Brignol had massive skull fractures. Zolotaryov and Dubinina both had severe chest trauma. Ribs broken with such force that the medical examiner compared the injuries to a high-speed car crash. Yet there were no external wounds, no cuts, no bruises, just catastrophic internal damage. Even stranger, some of the bodies were wearing clothes taken from the others. Dubinina was wearing Krivonishenko's pants. Another was wearing a torn sweater. Tests would later reveal that some of the clothing was contaminated with radiation. The lead investigator, Lev Ivanov, was baffled. He wrote in his report, "The force required to cause these injuries would be comparable to a car crash, but there was no car, no avalanche, no animal attack." So what happened? Part 4. The official story and why it doesn't add up. On May 28, 1959, the Soviet prosecutor's office officially closed the case. The conclusion: the cause of death was a compelling natural force which the hikers were unable to overcome. That was it. No details. No explanation. The files were classified and locked away for decades. But the official story had problems. Big problems. First, the tent. Why cut it open from the inside if there was no immediate threat? If an avalanche had hit, they would have been buried. But the tent was intact, just slashed. Second, the injuries. Forensic experts agreed. The chest and skull fractures were consistent with extreme blunt force trauma. But the lack of external injuries ruled out a fall, an attack, or an explosion. What could crush bones without leaving a mark? Third, the radiation. Why were some of the clothes contaminated? The levels weren't lethal, but they were measurable. Where did it come from? Fourth, the missing soft tissue. Dubinina's tongue, eyes, and facial tissue were gone. The medical examiner suggested scavenging animals, but her body had been under 4 meters of snow for 3 months. What animal could reach her there? And why only the soft tissue? Fifth, the lights in the sky. In the weeks before and after the incident, multiple witnesses in the region, including a meteorologist and another hiking group, reported seeing strange orange spheres moving across the night sky. Ivanov himself saw them. He wrote about them in his notes, but the Soviet government dismissed the reports. And finally, the location. Kholat Shakal, Dead Mountain, was near a Soviet military testing range. The area was restricted. Yet the Dyatlov group was allowed to hike there. Why? Part 5. Theories and why none of them work. Over the decades, investigators, scientists, and amateur sleuths have proposed dozens of theories. Let's examine the main ones. Theory 1. Avalanche. In 2020, a team of Swiss scientists ran computer simulations and concluded that a rare, delayed slab avalanche could have hit the tent hours after the group had settled in. The force could explain the injuries. But here's the problem. The tent was still standing. An avalanche strong enough to crush ribs wouldn't leave the tent intact. Also, the footprints leading away from the tent showed no signs of panic. If an avalanche had struck, there would be chaos, not orderly retreat. Theory 2. Infrasound-induced panic. Some researchers believe that wind passing over the mountain could have created low-frequency infrasound waves, which can cause feelings of dread, nausea, and irrational fear. Terrified, the hikers fled. But infrasound doesn't explain the catastrophic injuries, and if they were just scared, why didn't they return to the tent once the panic subsided? Theory 3. Hypothermia-induced paradoxical undressing. In the final stages of hypothermia, victims sometimes feel unbearably hot and remove their clothes. This could explain why some were found undressed, but it doesn't explain the crushed ribs, the missing eyes and tongue, or the radiation. Theory 4. Military test gone wrong. This is where things get darker. Kholat Shakal was near a Soviet military testing range. Some believe the hikers stumbled upon a secret test, possibly a missile, chemical weapon, or experimental weapon. The orange lights in the sky, rocket trails, the injuries, a pressure wave from an explosion, the radiation, contaminated debris. This theory also explains why the Soviet government closed the case so quickly and classified the files. They didn't want to admit a military accident had killed 9 civilians. But if it was a military test, why wasn't the tent destroyed? And why were the hikers allowed in the area in the first place? Theory 5. KGB execution. A few researchers believe the hikers witnessed something they weren't supposed to see, perhaps a covert operation or a top-secret installation. The KGB hunted them down. The problem? The footprints showed only the hikers' tracks. There was no evidence of anyone else on the mountain. Theory 6. Something else. The lead investigator, Lev Ivanov, gave an interview in 1990 after the collapse of the Soviet Union. He said, "I was ordered to close the case and bury the evidence. I was told not to mention the lights in the sky, but I saw them. We all did. I don't know what they were, but I know they were real." When pressed for his personal theory, Ivanov said, "I think the hikers encountered something we don't understand. Something the Soviet government didn't want investigated." Part 6. The bigger picture. Today, more than 65 years later, the Dyatlov Pass incident remains unsolved. The Russian government reopened the investigation in 2019 and concluded it was an avalanche. But many experts, and the families of the victims, reject that explanation. Why does this case still matter? Because it's a reminder that governments don't always tell the truth. Files get classified, witnesses disappear, evidence is buried, and sometimes the official story is a lie. The Dyatlov Pass incident isn't just about 9 hikers who died on a mountain. It's about the lengths powerful institutions will go to protect their secrets. It's about the questions we're not allowed to ask. And it's about the idea that maybe, just maybe, some mysteries are meant to stay unsolved. Final thoughts. Did the Dyatlov group die in a freak natural disaster? Were they victims of a Soviet military test? Or did they encounter something that even now, decades later, remains classified? We may never know. What we do know is this. 9 young people went into the mountains and never came back. Their families spent the rest of their lives searching for answers, and the Soviet government gave them nothing but silence. If you found this investigation compelling, subscribe to Classified Hidden Histories and hit the notification bell. Every week, We dig into the cases governments don't want solved, because some secrets are too dangerous to forget.